I think Bitcoin is somewhat isolated from what's happening in the clarity space.
Yeah.
So in a way, it's the most isolated. ETH is the next most isolated. It's somewhere in the middle, and everything else is directly exposed. I think that's a reasonable way to think about it. But clarity is broadly good for crypto as long as it's reasonable, and I think it will lift all of those segments if we get it.
The crypto market we knew in 2021 is officially dead. For years, investors treated altcoins as one giant speculative bucket, a monolith that moved together based on hype and Bitcoin's gravity. But according to Bitwise CIO Matt Hougan, that era is over. We are entering the age of the regulatory perimeter. In a recent deep dive, Hougan argues that the term altcoin no longer makes sense. Instead, we are seeing a violent bifurcation of the market. Winners who make it inside the institutional circle via ETFs and legislative clarity, and losers who are left in the cold. Hougan uses a brilliant analogy from the bond market to explain the current crypto landscape. In traditional finance, on-the-run bonds are the most recently issued and liquid. They trade at a premium because everyone wants them. Off-the-run bonds are older, less liquid, and trade at a discount. Before we go on, just a quick reminder, liking the video, subscribing to the channel, and commenting helps this reach more people who care about Bitcoin and macro trends. Appreciate the support.
Hold off on altcoin investment. Depends on where your definition of altcoins goes. I do think what's within the regulatory perimeter can create a degree of regulatory capture in this space.
Yeah.
So broadly speaking, I think that is probably true, but it really depends. I don't think altcoin even makes sense as a term anymore. I think there's more. We used to treat that as one generic sector. I think one element of clarity that will come true is there will be winners and losers in that space and people on different sides of that spectrum. So I guess I'd be nervous about putting one big box out there. I think increasingly it's multiple little boxes. And maybe you need more granular analysis. I think there's, in the bond world, there's the element of on the run and off the run bonds, where on the run bonds are the ones being traded that trade at better prices than off the run bonds. I think there's an element of that in the ETF market. I do think assets that can have ETF open doors for them will benefit from additional flows. They'll be within the institutional perimeter. And we've actually seen that in crypto over the years. There have been assets that you couldn't access in the US. There have been assets you couldn't get at institutional custodians. There's been things like parts of the privacy coin market, which have been pushed out of the institutional community and suffered for a long time as a result of that. So it's certainly the case that ETFs are a major vehicle for investment. And if you're outside of that, you're like an off the run bond.
Right.
And I think that will be increasingly true as ETFs become more and more important over time. I think Ethereum would be a relative winner versus other L1s if clarity fails to pass, because there's the strongest regulatory position. But I don't think investors should focus on relative returns. I think they should focus on absolute returns. And from an absolute return perspective, I think Ethereum benefits from clarity because I think you'll see additional growth of stablecoins, tokenization, and DeFi. That whole ecosystem will grow. So depends what you mean, relative or absolute, to which side of the spectrum I come down on that. I think Bitcoin is somewhat isolated from what's happening in the clarity space. So in a way, it's the most isolated. ETH is the next most isolated. It's somewhere in the middle, and everything else is directly exposed. I think that's a reasonable way to think about it. But clarity is broadly good for crypto as long as it's reasonable, and I think it will lift all of those segments if we get it. I think we're going to see digital asset treasuries evolve into new forms in 2026. I think mergers will be a piece of that discussion. I think more active use of the underlying crypto asset to do option overlay strategies and generate income and do lending will be a piece of that discussion. I think wind downs will even be a piece of that discussion. So look, I think there will be 3 or 4 different things that happen to DATs in 2026. Previously, they basically just bought crypto and held it. I think those days are over. I think M&A, wind downs, option overlay strategies, lending, more bond issuance. I think you're going to see DATs do some version of those 5 things and really differentiate from one another in 2026. I think we're going to see movement in both directions. The old thing about bills on Capitol Hill is they have to die 7 times before they're passed. So I think over the next few months, what you're going to see is expectations of this passing rise and fall depending on statements by politicians. That's because anyone who has a view on this bill will articulate it strongly to the media. And so you're going to have some people come out looking bullish, prices will go up. Some people come out looking bearish, prices will go down. If you look at Polymarket odds, it's almost at 50-50 on whether it will pass. There you go. You got it right there. I'm slightly more optimistic than that. But ultimately, I think we'll see it pass. And ultimately, I think that will be good for prices. But I would expect some volatility on that journey over the next couple of months. I think this is a normalization that reflects some positive fundamentals in the market. So going into the end of the Q4, as that showed, we were extremely bearish. I think people were worried that we're still shoes to drop from the October 10th liquidation event. Once we didn't see any bodies rise to the surface by the end of the year, people started to get more constructive on crypto. We had 2 additional events that I think have helped that. We had, as we talked about, some progress on the Clarity Act, and I do think it was progress. I think it pushed us closer towards approval. That was positive. We saw the concern around the lawsuit around Jerome Powell, which I think made some people think maybe I should have some Bitcoin exposure outside the fiat system. So look, we're taking the steps we need to have an exceptional year in crypto. Is there still risk ahead? Of course, Clarity could fail. We could see a variety of things. But I think the movement in prices is in part a rebound from an unnecessarily bearish position at Q4, but in part reflects positive fundamentals in the crypto market that made me excited about where we're going the rest of the year.
Hougan didn't hold back when discussing the latest stablecoin legislation. He called out a specific brazen rule being discussed in Washington, the idea that stablecoin issuers and the banks behind them can keep 100% of the interest income while the consumer gets 0%. Hougan's take? It's a $250 billion subsidy to the banking industry. He compares the banking lobby's resistance to stablecoins to the post office trying to ban email. They are protecting a lazy, rent-seeking part of their business because stablecoins are faster, cheaper, and more secure. While it hurts his soul to see such anti-consumer policy, he believes the market will eventually find a workaround through rebates and rewards. The tech is simply too good to be suppressed forever.
I mean, let's be clear about what this is saying. This is saying that if you take money and park it in a stable coin, the issuer of that stable coin has to take all the interest income. And the incredible thing out of Washington is that they're presenting this as somehow positive. It's unbelievable to me. This is your money that you're depositing effectively. You should earn the interest on it. It's really incredible that we're crystallizing into a law, a rule that says the banks can't pay you that interest. I mean, it's baffling to me. It's strongly anti-consumer. I wish it weren't true. Long term, I don't think it will matter. We can get into that. I think people will find a way to capture that yield. But as a indictment of Washington, I find it really stunning. You know, JP Morgan Chase bank accounts yield 0.01% for savers. So they're giving them 1 BIP and taking the other 4+. And as Nick Carter pointed out, that's a $250 billion subsidy to the banking industry. It's our money. If they're not worried, if they don't see the benefit that stablecoins offer to consumers, why do they think consumers would move their money there? Right? The reason they're worried about it is because it's a better, faster, cheaper, more secure way to store capital. And if you can get interest, it threatens a lazy rent-seeking part of their business. I wish it weren't the case, but I think it's just that. This is the post office trying to ban email is the equivalent of what we're saying here. That there is a lot in the Clarity Act that is positive long-term for crypto in terms of setting the fundamental underlying regulatory structure. And I think if we try to chase the perfect, we may lose the good, right? And if we get through this election cycle without a market structure bill, then crypto is building on a regulatory foundation of sand that could switch in a future administration. That's not a good place for entrepreneurs. So I'm hopeful that it goes through. The industry will find a way to get the yield to the people whose money it is through rebates, through awards, etc. And long term, I think this will reverse. It's just so brazen that even in the short term, it hurts my soul to see. Yeah, I've sort of been waiting to see if someone cries loudly on either extreme. So if you go back to the last time that the Clarity Act failed, there was crying loudly on both sides. The sort of pro-crypto arm was crying loudly about the absurd parts of the bill that had to do with DeFi. Those are not perfect now, but they've improved. The anti-crypto side was crying loudly that there was nothing about politicians enriching themselves through crypto assets, and they wanted that in the bill. The curious thing about the response to this markup is what we've seen is, as you mentioned, 137 amendments. And those amendments are important, but relatively small in scale. You don't have anyone saying this is a non-starter. I think that's why the market has been bullish, because in previous iterations, you had both sides saying this is a non-starter. Instead, what you're seeing is we need to tweak this. We're uncomfortable with this. We're unhappy with this, but we're willing to go forward. You're seeing more incrementalism. That's why I think the poly market odds may be understating the probability of success. As long as no one sort of screams from the rooftop in the next week or so, I think it's looking pretty good that this will move forward. I think DC has done a poor job on the interest side specifically. I think DC and crypto has done a pretty poor job on that issue. More broadly on the Clarity Act, look, I think there is wide popular support for reasonable regulations in this space. We've had some great champions in Congress who have advanced that. We've had great champions in David Sachs and the administration talking about why that's important and important for competitiveness. So I think they've done okay on that side. I think some of the specifics, maybe the industry has been conflicted, banks have been conflicted, and we haven't had great leadership because it's a touchy issue. Yeah. It's surprised me, to be frank. But broadly speaking, I think there's popular support to get this done. I wouldn't lay it at the feet of Sachs. That would reflect broader disagreement in Congress. I think so far we've made tremendous progress on crypto. Right, we've had a pullback at the SEC of really pernicious lawsuits on the space. We've seen the Genius Act go through. We've been working hard on the Clarity Act. So I think it's hard to look at the last year and see anything but extraordinary regulatory progress. It's hard to do things in Washington. I do think we'll get clarity through. But if we don't, I don't think it would be at David Sachs's feet. I imagine it would be somewhere between the nexus of the anti-crypto side of Congress and big banks lobbying.
To wrap up, Matt Hougan's message is clear. The rebound we're seeing isn't just a relief rally from a bearish Q4, it's a fundamental repricing of crypto's future. We've survived the liquidations, we've seen the SEC pull back on pernicious lawsuits, and we are moving toward a regulated institutional framework. The road to the end of 2026 will be volatile. Politicians will make statements that send prices swinging. But if you focus on the on-the-run assets, the ones within the regulatory perimeter, you're positioned for what Hougan calls an exceptional year